about growing up in New York? You were born in Brooklyn, is that right?
Yes, we didn't consider Brooklyn part of New York.
Okay.
Those of us who lived in Brooklyn in those days considered New York another city. But Brooklyn was a wonderful place to grow up, in the 40s and 50s. It was really the heyday of New York City sports. The World Series was played almost every year at one or two New York ballparks. It was just after the war. People were very euphoric, and it was a wonderful time. There was a great pride in being from Brooklyn.
Were you a sports fan as a kid?
Oh yes, I started following baseball when I was 9 years old, and became addicted to the Brooklyn Dodgers and some of the other teams in the area. But essentially, I was a Brooklyn Dodger fanatic.
Who were your heroes back then, the ball players?
Well, Pee Wee Reese was my hero, or my idol, my favorite player anyway. I've always admired leaders, and Pee Wee was the captain of the Dodgers, and he was the guy that put his arm around Jackie Robinson, and so I always admired him. And I guess my second favorite player was Duke Snider, because Duke lived on our block for several years during the summer, and he used to come out and play stickball with the kids. So he probably was my second favorite. And I was a big admirer of Red Barber, the radio announcer, because he really taught all of us in Brooklyn what baseball was all about.
Red Barber, of course, I worked at an NPR station for about 10 years down in Carbondale, and that was always one of the favorite things. I always looked forward to Friday mornings when he'd get on with Bob Edwards and do that. Yeah,
the old redhead. He was he was quite an interesting man.
A lot of the sports figures like that are really so important to the history of America. Must be nice to have an opportunity to rub shoulders with so many of them as you do.
Well, one of the nice things of being in sports is you do get to meet an awful lot of people, people that you might not otherwise meet, and there are some really great people that have been involved in sports, even though what we do is not nearly as important as things like Jonas Salk inventing the polio vaccine, but it's a very interesting profession.
Well, it's something that we as Americans really find an identity with.
Yes, I've never really quite understood, our emphasis on sports, our addiction to sports. I never understood, why should I care if the Brooklyn Dodgers won or lost? Why should anybody care if the Chicago White Sox won or lost? But somehow we do. Somehow that's our culture, and when our sports teams do well, we feel good about ourselves, and our city feels good. And when the Chicago Bulls win 5 championships in 7 years, you can travel around the world and people don't mention Al Capone anymore. They want to talk about Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls.
Well, that's got to be a good feeling, because I know for a long time everybody always thought of Capone. Well, that's. I was going to ask that a little bit later, but since you kind of touched on it, I'd like to move into that. Chicago is a very diverse city, ethnically, sociologically. I imagine that with a team like the Bulls, White Sox, Cubs, of course, too, with the Bulls, the people can really get out and feel like they are all together in something, I guess.
Well, that's right. When a team wins a championship, it really does bring a city together, and in this case, a region, because everybody's a part of it. I mean, and there's no question that, in my mind, that the Bulls would not have won the last game this year had it not been for the energy that the crowd transmitted to the players. We never would have won that game on another court, and then the fans really are a part of it.
When you see the political battles and the battles in various kinds that take place across a city as big as Chicago, and you see them all getting behind one organization or one team, how does that feel for you, knowing that you've got a role in that?
Well, I feel very proud. I mean, when I've stood up at the Grand Park bandshell, 5 different times and looked out at hundreds of thousands of people who were, so happy. It's really a pleasure to know that I had some part, even if it's a small part, some part in bringing happiness to those people.
I'd like to go back a little bit on your way here. You went to, when did you first come to Chicago? Was that to attend law school?
Yes, I came to Chicago in 1957, September 1957, to go to Northwestern University Law School. and I fully intended to then go back east afterwards. But my first job was with the Internal Revenue Service in the Regional Counsel's Office, and they had a rule that you could not work in your home state. And so I decided to stay in Chicago, and it was the best decision that I ever made.
I believe I remember you making some comments to the Lincoln Academy when you were down for the convocation about how your wife helped type your papers and things like that.
Oh yeah, I never would have achieved anything in life if it weren't for my wife and her, her being with me. And in law school, she worked full time, and I was only able to work summers. She typed all of my papers, and those were in the days where they didn't have word processors. So if if you had to make a change, you almost had to retype the entire page. And we used carbon copies, and so if she wanted to erase something, she had to erase 6 or 7 carbon copies. And she worked all day, and she typed my papers at night. And she tolerated all the time that I put in at the school, and then she tolerated all the hours that I put in after school trying to get ahead.
She's been a valuable partner all the way through.
Well, I guess you could say she's a partner. I sort of look at her as my boss.
How so? Does she play a role in the decision-making here?
Well, I'd say that I make all the important decisions, and she makes all the rest of the decisions, and just that we haven't had any important decisions to make in the last 40 years. Somebody once said that he makes the important decisions, such as should we declare war on Red China, and his wife makes all the other decisions.
You met another person here who's played a role in your life for a long time. A guy used to teach over at Northwestern, Jim Thompson.
Yeah, well, Jim Thompson attended Northwestern at the same time that I did. He was a year ahead of me, and I remember talking to him. We certainly weren't close friends at that time because he was a year ahead of me. But he was somebody that was very well known at the time, and he had political aspirations, and he had a plan, and he certainly lived out his plan.
Yeah, I keep thinking President Thompson might not be out of the question at some point.
Well, Jim Thompson would certainly be a lot better president than some of the people that we've had in that job.
He's always been a joy to cover as a reporter, that's for sure. You moved into real estate after the IRS. Can you talk about that aspect of your career?
Well, when I left the IRS, I joined a law firm in private practice, a large law firm, and then I moved from there to a smaller firm, and developed a fairly substantial client base. And one of the nice things about being a tax lawyer is that all of your clients are rich, and they had tax problems, and they were interested in what kind of investments they could go into that would be both good investments and would also be good for saving taxes. And a number of them urged me to get into that business, and so I did in 1971. I started with some fellows and finding good real estate investments that also had tax shelter advantages.
Did you still follow sports during that period?
Well, I've always followed sports, but not as extensively as when I was young. Once I started having kids and having to spend so much time in business, there wasn't as much time for sports. But I always sort of kept an eye on it. But I certainly lost the devotion that I had.
When did you make the move into active sports management and ownership?
Well, in the fall of 1980, an opportunity came along to get involved with the White Sox, and I put together a group of people who bought the team in January of 1981, and I've been running it ever since then.
Was it ever a dream of yours to own a professional sports team?
No, the only dreams I ever had, were dreams of owning a car. I never, as a kid, thought that I'd ever have enough money to be involved in owning a sports team. I wanted to become a lawyer and have a car. That was all I ever dreamt about.
When the possibility came open to buy the White Sox, what was that in terms of a change in your life or change in direction?
Well, it meant a certain loss of privacy. I mean, it meant moving into a business where whenever you make decisions, you have the entire public judging your decisions, even though they don't have the facts. And but at the same time, it gave me an opportunity to give back. Chicago had been a city where its sports franchises had not done very well, and I'd always felt, like all fans, that, boy, if I could run a team, I would do a better job. And so, it gave me a chance to do a better job than had been done with the White Sox and with the Bulls, and to give back to the community. And it's one of the great pleasures.
What did you think you could bring to the table as a manager and as an owner that maybe hadn't been there before? What skills do you think that you had that would make these teams a success?
Well, I don't know if I actually have these skills, but as far as basketball is concerned, I had a vision, and the vision was that the way to win championships was not by having a bunch of great players who know how to score, but rather by putting together a team of some good players and role players who would primarily focus on defense. I really felt that defense was the way to win basketball games, even though that was an emphasis that had long, gone away. And so that was the vision I had for basketball. As far as baseball, my vision was that you had to have a good farm system. You had to develop players, because I remember that was the greatness of Branch Rickey and the Brooklyn Dodgers. And so we set about to build a good farm system for the White Sox.
With the Bulls, how did that philosophy evolve into the dynasty we have today with Michael Jordan at the top and a wonderful cast of players around him?
Well, the first thing that I had to do was to get a general manager who shared the same vision, and then his job then was to get players who would be unselfish players, who would be proud of playing defense, because there are no statistics. There are very few statistics on defense, and people don't pay attention to it. And then he had to find a coach and a coaching staff that would put the focus on defense. And then the other part of the vision was that I wanted an offense that wasn't isolations, wasn't one player trying to score on another player, but rather was a team-oriented thing with movement off the ball. And again, it had to find the right general manager, which I did in Jerry Krause, and we had to find the right coach, and it took a while, before we did. We had Doug Collins, who did a pretty good job, took us a part of the way, and then Phil Jackson took us the rest of the way.
You also had to have the facilities, the venues for these kinds of games. And the old Comiskey Park wasn't up to it. And, you needed a place for the Bulls to play. Tell us about the challenges that you had in pulling together the financial capital and the political capital to make that happen.
Now, actually, there are two really different stories involving the venues for these teams. In the case of Comiskey Park, it was literally going to fall down. I mean, it was literally a disaster. We spent $19 million to buy the team, and I think we spent $20 million trying to fix the ballpark up. But eventually we were told by engineers that there was nothing that could be done. The ballpark couldn't be saved. But the funny thing is, even if somebody could have waved the magic wand and restored Comiskey Park to mint condition the way it was when it was built in 1910, that wouldn't have been good enough anymore, because under the economics that exist in sports, you have to have suites, you have to have luxury seats, you have to have clubs, so that you can generate the revenues to pay the salaries in order to remain competitive. And the same thing with the United Center. There we had a stadium that was rock solid. The old Chicago Stadium probably could have stood another 50 years, but it was economically obsolete because we couldn't generate the revenues that would be necessary to pay the players so that we could compete. And that was the reason why that one had to be replaced. In the case of Comiskey Park, there would be no new Comiskey Park if it weren't for Governor Thompson. There was nothing that I could do, other than talk to people, but he was the guy that had to deliver, and he did. In the case of the United Center, the trick, since it was going to be all privately funded, was to find financing. Now, unfortunately, we started looking for financing right in the middle of what was a real estate depression. And we had a hard time convincing lenders that this really wasn't a real estate transaction, but that in reality they were financing a building in which the business of sports was going to be run. And as it turned out, we had, I think, of the $140 million of debt financing, $3 million came from two small minority-owned banks in Chicago, and the balance of the money was all offshore.
What do the people of Chicago get back from having two wonderful teams like this, a dynasty like the Bulls, a great team like the White Sox? What do they get back from having teams like that in their town?
Well, they get good feelings. I mean, they get very good feelings. They get the opportunity to crow when they're talking to their friends from other places, but they also have the opportunity to see the reputation of the city spread worldwide, and that brings business here. That brings tourists here. it brings business here. It just contributes overall to the general good feeling. And of course, the United Center is probably the best indoor venue in the entire country, and it attracts all sorts of other things. We've had boxing and wrestling and ice shows and circuses and concerts, and there's so much more that's available for people to do, in their off hours.
You mentioned a short time ago that one of the things that when you went into sports ownership, you lost a certain degree of privacy. How tough is it to manage a team like this, like the White Sox too, when you've got millions of fans who probably think, geez, I could have done that better. What's he thinking?
Well, it's very difficult to operate a sports franchise because you really can't allow yourself to be controlled by the public. People have opinions, as I did when I was a fan, but they don't have the facts. And somebody once said that if you worry about what the fans are thinking, you'll end up sitting with the fans. And I think that's true. It's my responsibility is to do the best possible job that I can do for the fans, and then hopefully have my decisions turn out to be correct.
What does it mean to do the best for the fans in your view here in Chicago?
Well, I view my responsibility to the fans as having franchises that compete consistently. I mean, it's too much to expect to win a title every year. It's probably too much to expect to win 5 and 7 years. But what I hope to have for our fans is our teams that each and every year have a realistic chance of winning and present good entertainment when they go to see them play.
Well, that's a question I was thinking about with regard to the Bulls. My gosh, what they've been able to do over the years. How can you get any better than what you're doing now?
Well, I don't know how we can get any better than what we've done, but we certainly want to try to keep it going. And basketball is a great sport, an exciting sport, and we just want to keep it going as long as we possibly can. And then when it's over, hopefully we can get back to the top or near the top, as fast as we can. I mean, it may very well be that we'll never win another championship, but it won't be for lack of trying.
Will we ever know another figure quite as charismatic as Michael Jordan?
Well, Michael Jordan is probably the greatest athlete to ever play a team sport, I think, of all time. He's so far above all of the other players of his generation, and he does combine that with a wonderful personality. I doubt that we'll ever see another Michael Jordan. But on the other hand, you never know. All of a sudden, as Michael's career is fading out, Tiger Woods comes along. And I think he has the potential, in some respects, to be another Michael Jordan, just as Michael Jordan is probably another Babe Ruth.
Do you ever worry that maybe the professional sports business has become too much of a big business, that maybe the fans don't feel as much a part of things as they used to?
Well, sports certainly is not a business to the owners. There really is not a lot of money to be made in sports. I don't know anybody who bought a team who said to himself, this is a good way to deploy my capital. There are far better ways. If I worked as hard as I do doing something else, I'd make a lot more money. And yet, I think in baseball, there seems to be too much emphasis on what people make. And it's not that the fans begrudge players the money. I think what the fans don't like is a player who makes a lot of money complaining that it's not enough.
When you sit down at the end of the day, as you look about the various interests that you have, what gives you the most personal satisfaction of what you've been able to do in your life?
Well, the most personal satisfaction is derived from my grandchildren. That gives me more satisfaction than anything else that I've done. But on a professional level, which I guess is what you really want to talk about, obviously the 5 championships that the Bulls have won. I mean, it's just something that in modern history really hasn't been done in sports. I know the Celtics won, I think it was 10 out of 12 or something like that, but they only had 7 or 8 or 9 teams in the league in those years, and it was a lot easier to win championships.
Is Mrs. Reinsdorf working on a new ring?
I hope so. I hope she is. She designed the first 3 rings, and the 4th ring, she had other things that she was involved in at the time, and so she didn't do the 4th ring. And I've had a lot of people tell me that they didn't like the fourth ring that much, so I'm hoping that she'll do the fifth one.
Is there another avenue of sports or another area of sports that you might take an interest in? Somebody said, well, ask him if he'll buy the Bears someday.
You know, I don't think I ever want to get involved at all in any other sports teams. I mean, enough is enough. You know, I enjoy what I'm doing. I still have one big goal left, and that's for the White Sox to win a World Series and to win it before the Cubs do. So that's sort of the focus, and you know, that may or may not happen. I mean, I think the Cubs and the White Sox have played 169 seasons without either team winning a World Series.
So that would be the big goal for you. The last remaining thing you'd like to get done is to have them win the series.
Yes, that would be the last goal.
What would that do for you? How would that make you feel?
That'd make me feel pretty good.
No doubt. I'd like to turn to some other areas. You've been actively engaged in a lot of charity work in the Chicago area. Could you talk about some of the things that are your favorite activities in that respect?
Well, I think when you're successful, you owe something to the community, and I think the sports franchises, which derive so much support from the community, have to give back. And you know, we established White Sox charities and a Bulls charity that we call Charity Bulls, and those two charities have been very active with monies not only donated by the teams and the owners of the teams, but also monies that we've raised from other sources. We've done a number of things. I'm very proud of the fact that the White Sox completely refurbished all of the diamonds, baseball diamonds in the Chicago Park District, and of course the building of the James Jordan Boys and Girls Club and Family Life Center is something that we're very proud of. And also the Chicago White Sox have kind of adopted the public school system as our primary focus, and we introduced the school system to a reading program called the Direct Instruction, which is really working very well in the schools where it's been introduced. I think students have increased their reading comprehension 2-3 years, in 1 year, and so it's those kinds of things that are important, and we hope to continue to do those.
What kind of marching orders do you give people in your organization for the kinds of things you want supported?
Well, each of the teams has somebody who's in charge of civic and charitable activities, and essentially the marching orders to the person at the Bulls is to try to do things to help the community that the Bulls live in or work in, and so we focused a great deal on the west side of Chicago. The focus of the Chicago White Sox is the public school system. Because I've long felt that education is the way out of the ghetto. It's not welfare, it's not handouts, it's education. And if the kids don't learn to read, they can be lost by the second or third grade. And so that focus is very important to us.
Tell me about the James Jordan Center.
Well, James Jordan Center is a building of about 40,000 square feet, which was named in memory of Michael Jordan's father, who was murdered several years ago. It's not an athletic club. It's a facility where kids can come and they can play ball, but it's also a learning center. And we have computers there. It's right next door to a library that it has a relationship with, and it's a haven really in the neighborhood where kids can come and they can mix with other kids. They can learn how to use computers. They can be educated in various ways. And they get to play a little ball if they want to.
Fantastic. A good place for kids to go and get out of some of the bad influences they might otherwise find.
I think that's right. I think one of the things that causes many kids, not to get educated and to go into crime, is the peer group that they fall in. And what the Jordan Boys and Girls Club does is offer them an opportunity to mix with kids who want to get out of the ghetto, who want to do something, who think it is cool to learn how to read and to write and to use computers.
You seem very aware of the role, the responsibility of role model that your teams have, not only in the Chicagoland area, but I guess around the country because of the positive role they can play.
Well, there's no question. I think every one of us has an obligation. Everyone who has been successful has an obligation to go back and help those who are less successful. And if people don't want to look at it as an obligation, they at least ought to realize that it's smart, because I want a good community for my grandchildren and for my grandchildren's grandchildren. And the best way to get that is to help build this community and help eliminate crime and eliminate poverty.
One of the things I did want to ask you about, and I ask all the laureates about this, it's kind of a question I always ask them. What did you think when you got the notification that you were going to become a laureate of the Lincoln Academy?
Well, knowing who prior laureates were, I thought it was absurd. I really did not know what I could possibly have done to deserve this, because where I feel my contribution compared to what some of the other people have done is insignificant, and I really did not understand it. And but as I said at the convocation, we take it. but I was just proud to be thought of in the same breath as these great people who have gotten the award before and who got the award with me.
One question I would like to ask, we've talked a little bit about your wife. What sort of role has your family played in the success that you've been able to enjoy?
Well, I think we're all a product of our families. My mother was a tremendous influence on me. There's so many things that she told me, and that I still believe and I still practice. And my father, I didn't spend a lot of time with my father when I was growing up because he worked so hard, but I certainly learned work ethic, from my father. And then as I grew up and got my own family, the support that I got from my wife and from my kids while I was trying to get ahead was tremendous. I mean, I've known many people who had more talent than me who did not succeed professionally because their wives held them back, because their wives wanted them home for dinner every single night. And my wife never put those demands on me. She wanted me home, she wanted me to help with the kids, but she recognized that what I was doing, had to take precedence.